Welcome to another special guest episode. Our guest today is a social media content creator that recently graduated from UCLA with her MBA and now lives in Portland working for Nike. I am pleased to have Audrey DeVaughn with me today. How you doing, Audrey?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, AJ.
Good, good, good. So before we get started, because there's a lot to kind of get to today, because for people that don't know about your content, you cover a lot. So I want to be able to touch on everything. But before we get started, I have to say thank you for taking some time out of I'm sure, a very busy schedule. You're recently moving to Oregon from California. So thank you for that. But let's get it started. I'll hand it off to you. Tell us a little bit about your childhood, your upbringing, your family life, and how you got into sports.
Sure. Yeah. So I actually grew up for the most part in Minneapolis, Minnesota, um, which was fun. My dad was a professor there at a college, and I grew up playing sports. A funny thing, I actually started as a gymnast. Was a pretty good gymnast for my age, but now looking back, I could never be an actual gymnast. I'm like 5'9", so that's much taller than the average gymnast. But the funny thing, the way I got into sports or playing sports first was um, I was very, very shy as a kid. And so my family had moved from Wisconsin to Minneapolis, and I was going into second grade. And my second grade teacher during parent teacher conferences was like, no, she's great. She's smart, but she's shy. I would recommend putting her into a team sport to kind of like break out of her shell. And so that winter, my parents enrolled me in on a basketball team, the rec basketball team. And then the following spring, I did soccer, and then I started track and ended up doing all three sports throughout high school. Um, so yeah, that was kind of my first introduction to sports. For me, it was big about like building my confidence and becoming a leader. I I was pretty competitive. However, most of it was just like playing. A funny story I like to say is that my brother and I both had a game on the same day. This was when I was in second grade, and we both lost. And he comes running back to my mom and is like, I can't believe we lost. This is awful. And I come back running to my mom and I'm like, we almost won. And I was like, this is so exciting. I love basketball. This is the best. And so yeah, I've always been kind of a sports lover in that way. And then as I grew up, I kind of loved more of the behind the scenes and the storytelling of it. I my family was big into March Madness, and I'm forgetting what year it was, but it was the year that Butler went to the finals, and we were all in our basement watching, and that was where I'm like, wow, this is magical.
It's crazy that you say you were shy at the beginning because watching you now, it's like the complete opposite. So I guess you have to thank your parents for putting you in that rec basketball league that got everything
Oh
started.
yes, it
Um,
did.
so you said, or I've seen you went to UCLA, you just graduated from there.
Hmm.
But you're 28, correct?
Yes,
And that was your
yes.
master's. So did you spend some time at a different university before that?
Yeah, so I actually went to Yale for undergrad and I studied economics there. I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do post college, and so I went and took a consulting job. So I lived in New York for a couple years, and then over COVID moved back to Minneapolis to spend time with family and worked there. And then just kind of realized I didn't love it. I was good at my job, but I wasn't passionate about it. And so that's when I actually decided to go back and get my MBA. And UCLA was the spot for me because I was interested in kind of sports entertainment, and LA is like the epicenter of sports entertainment, and was
Yeah.
able to get a great kind of education, meet so many people, and learn about it, and eventually help me to get my role that I'm about to start with Nike.
So you said you played what in high school? Basketball, track, and
Soccer.
soccer. So
Mhm.
you went to Yale and UCLA. Was there any like thought? So I played college basketball at a small school and I just
Mhm.
graduated. But was there any thought of playing at like a smaller school, or like when did that decision come that you kind of wanted to move on from playing? And because that's always a tough thing with athletes, like knowing that point where you're ready to hang it up. So when was that for you?
Yeah, so when I was looking at colleges, I kind of looked. across the board. So there were a few schools that I was looking for to play sports in kind of like the Midwest, D2, D3. And then at Yale, even I was considering my basketball coach wanted me to walk on to the basketball team, and then I was also thinking about doing track there. However, track is like the winter season and the spring
Yeah.
season, and me kind of like moving far from home. I went to a public high school and going to Yale with all these people that went to boarding schools and private schools. I was like, I think I just want to like focus on my education, but that's not to say that I didn't still play sports. So I did club soccer and club basketball at Yale, and I did every single intramural under the sun. I actually got an award at the end of my senior year of like basically the best intramural player.
Wow.
So I like to say, I like to call it my athletic NARP award. I don't know if you've heard of that
Uh-uh.
acronym. um, but yeah, so I for me, again, sports was about like connecting with people, and it was less about winning in competition. So I was like, I'm gonna prioritize my education here and still play sports in a way that it is, it gives to me. So I was like, I met
Yeah.
most of my friends in club sports there.
I think for me, I always had that competitive nature to myself. And so you talked about kind of going into the connection that sports gives. I think I started to get into that junior and senior year, and I think that's where you and I are now kind of on the same path and mindset. So spending time at Yale and UCLA, what is your experience like at both of those colleges and universities? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so they were very different, as you
Oh,
can
sure.
probably guess. But I learned a lot from both of my experiences there. And so I think Yale, and when you're going through your undergrad experience, you're still kind of figuring out what you want to do. At a school like Yale, there's a lot of pressure to kind of follow a certain path. And so I majored in economics. So it's like you either go into like investment banking or consulting. And then I went into consulting. And it kind of took uh, COVID and moving back home to kind of realize that's not the path that I want to do. And I don't need to kind of follow that just because that's what a lot of other people are doing. And so UCLA was kind of, um, for me, getting off the hamster wheel. And obviously, it's still a really great school, but I knew that I wasn't. A lot of people go back to business school to get into consulting or to get into banking. And I was like, I want to do marketing and sports and something that I love. And so going back to school with that clarity of what I wanted made the experience like super fun. It was like UCLA overall is a little less competitive. Everyone is very collaborative, helping. Not to say that Yale wasn't, but it's a
Yeah.
little bit of a different
Yeah.
environment there. But both of those experiences, I think, helped to get me where I am today. Obviously, the Yale name is super helpful when
Hmm.
applying for
Sure.
jobs, and then just the access that I was able to get, especially within sports at UCLA, was extremely helpful.
Where is Yale? I'm thinking Pennsylvania. Is that correct?
New Haven, Connecticut.
Wow, wow, I did not know that. So
Yeah.
you went straight there out of high school, correct?
Yes.
So Yale is as you mentioned, that's a big name school. So is that like a
Mhm.
huge I've seen so many clips, I have to ask, like of videos of people celebrating when they get into an Ivy League school. Was that like a huge celebration for you and your family?
It was a big celebration, but I was still kind of undecided when I got in. I actually waited till the last day. It was between Yale and actually University of Wisconsin, Madison.
Hmm.
So I grew up in Minnesota. A lot of my friends went there. And the funny thing was like I really wanted to go to a big sports school, especially a big basketball school, because that was the
Yeah.
sport that I loved. And Ivy Leagues are not as competitive in sports.
Yeah.
But I knew that like going if I didn't go to Yale, I'd always think what if,
Mhm.
and now going it has opened a lot of doors for me. So yes, I was extremely excited, but I don't think like my experience was the same as others where it's like, oh, immediately let's go to Yale. To me, I was definitely weighing other options and trying to figure out
Yeah.
what was best for me.
Gotcha. Let's get into a little more of your content now, because that's
Mhm.
how I kind of connected with you. And I don't remember if I followed you first and I found you or you followed us. I don't remember how that went, but that's a great thing about sports to me is you talk about connecting. We would not be, even able to do this if we hadn't connected through sports. So when
Absolutely.
did that become a thing for you that you wanted to pursue, especially TikTok? You're doing very well over there right now. So how did that, or when did that become a thing for you?
Yeah, so it's actually kind of funny. TikTok was definitely a COVID quarantine download at
Yes.
first.
Yes. Yeah.
Doing the trends, the dances with my sister. But it was really like halfway through business school, where I'm going to UCLA. I'm learning about sports and sports management from the best of the best. But at the same time, it's kind of peeling back the curtain, and I'm seeing how still very traditional the sports industry is in terms of the types of professors that I have and the guests that they bring in. I was always like very comfortable. I'm a pretty avid sports fan, so I was comfortable in those spaces. But it kind of occurred to me when my friend, who was an athlete in college, came to one of those classes, and she's like, I just did not feel comfortable. It felt like kind of like a boys' club, and like that I didn't belong. And so I was like, wow. Um, I think I can kind of take what I'm learning in business school, share my perspectives on TikTok. Um, I got this advice of like how to differentiate yourself in sports. And this guy was like, you need to start talking or writing about sports. So they're like, either, start a podcast or write a blog or start writing a column in a newsletter. It's like, even if your podcast has like 15 listeners, that's 15 more listeners than the next person who's applying. And so for me, I was like, I already know how to use TikTok. I'm just going to start doing that versus create a whole new thing. And so that's kind of when I started, where I kind of identified there was this gap of like people who like sports but may not feel like they belong, and trying to kind of reach those. And so yeah, I just kind of started talking on TikTok. I wasn't expecting it to go anywhere. I think my first video to kind of go semi-viral was I was talking about the sports bra, which is a sports bar here in Portland that plays
Hmm.
specifically
Hmm.
women's sports. And just like the response to that, I was like, oh, I could really kind of keep talking about this. And for me, it's
Yeah.
always been like a passion for me. I don't expect to like make a living from content creation. It's more like I just want to introduce new voices in kind of the sports industry.
No, that's great. You also had another viral video, I should say, about the organ, like some kind of flight. Or tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. Yeah, so that one's actually so funny, because I filmed that in like 15 seconds. I was actually at a men's volleyball game at UCLA. I was early, so I was saving seats for my friends. And I was like a week ago, I was on this flight where the person next to me was wearing an Oregon hat and was like, "Oh yeah, I'm flying up. I'm going to see the game this weekend." And I was just like, "Oh, men's or women's?" And he was like, "Oh, men's." And I was like, "Oh, that's great." And I just realized like that's something that is not natural for people to
Mhm.
say. And to me, it just seems like so easy. I did not think it would go as viral as it did. But it was a reminder that like these simple things, things that seem so simple to me, are, revolutionary to some people.
Yes.
And that one took off, and I think that really inspired me to do more within content. And then a lot of other like sports outlets, especially around women's sports, kind of picked it up and reshared it. And
Yeah.
no, it's been great. And I've been able to meet a lot of people from that video specifically too.
Isn't it funny how that works? Because I will spend like half a day on a video and it doesn't do anything, and then I make one in 30 seconds and it gets 100,000 views. It's frustrating,
It's so
but
funny. That's
but
the
it's
annoying
great.
thing, but great thing about TikTok. Yeah, I
Yeah.
I filmed it, posted it, and I'm mad about it too because now like the one I have is like 1.7 million on Instagram. It's like 1.1 million, and it's like this
Yeah.
awful angle of me, like my nose is running, and I was like, I was not expecting that, and I'm like, great, but at
Yeah.
least the message is getting out there.
Sure. And your message overall is something that I don't feel is really touched on by a lot of creators. Like you have creators like us, which just talk about sports and give their opinions. You're actually like informing others about a whole different side of it. Like we're just giving stats and which is great, but
Mhm.
like you're giving like whole new side of sports, which is great.
Yeah, and that's really kind of like that gap that I identified. It's
Hmm.
and I it's just kind of like sports has been so traditional, sorry.
No,
and
you're good.
and it's like people don't know about these inequities, and like I know because I just did my master's and like took as many sports classes as I could. Again, I'm like one of maybe three girls in those classes, and so it's all kind of staying within the same group of people. So I'm like, oh, other people should know this. And even when I was growing up and even in undergrad, I was when I thought about like, oh, to work in sports is like I have to be an athlete or I have to be a coach or I have to be
Hmm.
an announcer. But going to like business school, I'm like, there's so much opportunity within sports too. And so part of what I want to do is to show the next generation that there's so much you can do within
Uh-huh.
sports, and just like it is a viable career. Like you don't need to follow these paths that you think you should.
Yeah.
So that's part of it. Yeah, I really like where sport kind of overlaps with culture and talking about, and I was trying to think of like what is my brand and like yes
Hmm.
it's sports, but it's more inclusivity and equity through the lens of sports. And I think sports is just such a relatable way to talk about things.
Yeah.
Everyone kind of gets it, and so it's like actually a really valuable tool to like talk about more serious things as well.
Building off of that, this is a tough question because it's loaded and you could go any direction. There's a lot of answers. But what is in your opinion the best aspect of sports? What's the greatest thing it does?
um my biggest thing I think about sports is that it is, it's global and it's like a language that everyone understands.
Yes.
And I I talk about this in my Nike interview too. It's like sport is a powerful that in a society that's so divided, especially and
Sure.
polarized,
Mhm.
like sports is something that still brings people together. And like, yes, there might be a lot of stuff going on, but then when the Olympics start, like 2 weeks, like the whole world is tuned in and just like cheering, and there's really nothing else out there that's like that. And I actually went to a talk by this author. How he wrote a book called "How Basketball Can Save the World,"
Yeah.
which is more of a philosophy book, but he uses basketball as the lens, because it is so like relatable. And he's like, basketball is super interesting because people are so excited about it, like from all parts of the world. Like there's rural Indiana as well as like deep
Yeah.
Harlem, and they're both like loving this one thing. And so I think sports just has the power to bring people together regardless of what they believe. And that's why I think I mean, that's the aspect that I love most about sports. It's like this universal language that everyone kind of understands.
I actually completely agree, and that would be my answer. I'm getting into coaching, and I have a potential basketball coach position available as an assistant coach. And it's going to be
Mhm.
great being around the game because I've always loved the game of basketball, but the impact you can make on other people and the family type environment and seeing others succeed is super powerful. Now looking at
Mhm.
the bad side of it, what is the one thing that you would change about sports? There's a lot. I know that's where it gets loaded, but what's one thing that you could like pick out that you would say you'd want to change?
Um, this this might be like a hot take.
Okay.
But one thing that I've thought about, and in business school, I just have like an interesting perspective, I think, is that sports has become so commercialized. I think it's awesome that there's so much money in sports, but I think because there's so much money, a lot of greed kind of comes into it. And so, um, I talked about this on my channel with like youth sports. It's like, okay, we want to grow youth sports. There's actually a lot of money in it, but then it becomes more inaccessible to other people. Like for me, I love sports because it brings people together, but the more and more commercialized it is, the more inaccessible, or the more like greed can come into play in terms of like these super rich team owners that can kind of do what they want.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
With players and things like that. And so I think that would be something that's tough, and I think that's also, you see the effects with women's sports too, of like,
Sure.
oh, people just care about the profitability of it because sports is just like something to make money. It's like, no, sports is is a tool. It helps people develop. It's good for society. And so the commercialization of men's sports, I think, also hurts women's sports because people are looking for like those types of returns. And so I think that's kind of an aspect that I think is bad. Obviously, it's great too because it grows the game, and
Yeah,
it can
yeah.
also address accessibility. But that's I think there's a push and pull there where it kind of pulls away from like the true, for me, the true meaning of sport, and that's why I also struggle sometimes with NIL. I think it's great. I think pay the players. I
Yeah,
think all of
it's
that,
tough.
but then you see like these like multi-million-dollar things that are, you know, kind of preying on high schoolers to like come here for money. And so it's yeah, it's just something that I've been thinking about like from the lens of a business, sports is a business, and like
Yeah.
what I care about sports and what it can do for people.
That's interesting because I've thought about that, but not as in depth as you just explained. That is very interesting. An issue I have is when we look at women's sports and we say, well, it's at an all-time high compared to what the past was like. But then you compare it to the men's side, and there's so much work still to be done. That's my issue is when we
Hmm.
get content with just saying, well, women's sports has really improved over the years, or it could be any, social issue. It's gotten better than what it was in the 60s, whatever political issue, whatever. There's
Hmm.
a lot of work still to be done though.
There's so much work to be done, especially in terms of I think what's next is like the sports media and coverage of women's sports.
Yeah,
Obviously, coming off of a great like women's March Madness season, like
sure.
I feel like that was the first time where women's college basketball kind of like broke the seal a little bit. Um, and just like you can see when it's marketed correctly, people will tune in. And so I think that's kind of the next piece of getting brands to invest, market like sports media outlets to market it better. And then that will also um, build into people wanting to watch and again, trickle down for youth participation and things like that. Because my biggest issue I think that I care about is like participation at the youth level because I know how much benefit sports provided me and
Yeah.
what it can do for other young girls.
Touching a little bit on the WNBA really quick, do you
Mhm.
think for people that don't follow WNBA, I don't know what you're doing, like why you're not, but with New York and Las Vegas kind of loading up and making like a two super teams, and they're both kind of, especially Las Vegas, just running through it right now. Do you
Mhm.
think that hurts the WNBA having that like star power all loaded on one team, or do you think it helps because they get a lot of attention?
I think um I think a little bit of both. Like obviously the attention of like the super teams and like I know the recent matchup was like insane and a bunch of people tuned in and like if you have a lot of basketball is a very star driven sport and so if you have
Sure.
stars you can help with marketing and things like that. But at the same time like parity is something that helps like increasing competition helps grow the game as well. And so I think about that also with at the college level why I thought the women's tournament was so great this year is like there were finally like upsets and like in the
Hmm.
past
Hmm.
in the
Yeah.
women's side it's like it'd be all number one seeds and so like the upsets are good for the game and so I do think like the super team it does a little bit of both but then when you upset a super team like that's a storyline too of like there's you know David versus Goliath and things like that
Sure.
and so I think at this stage it's helpful because it's we're still just trying to like hello like the WNBA exists and they can play basketball and it's a good product in the long run I do think parity is going to be important to like continue to grow in all of those markets.
Yeah, I know the transfer portal has been a huge thing talked about these last couple of years, and Haley Van Lith going to LSU. I personally didn't love the move because that's kind of like the superpower on one team type of deal. But it's something like I wanted to hear your input because I can also see both sides of seeing a superstar
Hmm.
matchup like we had with the Aces and the Liberty the other night gets a lot of attention, but then the other games don't get as much attention because they're not as, they don't have the stars. Moving on to a little bit of what you're doing now for your primary full time work with Nike.
Mhm.
What is like? How did you even get into this, and how did what are you doing with it?
Yeah, so, I'm starting at the end of July here, but I'm gonna do marketing for Nike, and it's actually a rotational program, for, brand management, brand creative, like, digital marketing, so every 6 months, I'll actually move to a different team. But I actually interned with Nike last summer, and I was on their women's brand management team, for one of the geographies was, the one I was working for was Asia Pacific and Latin America. And I'm so jealous of my team from last summer because they're all going to the Women's World Cup in Australia and New Zealand at the end of the month, because that's their geo. Um, but yeah, basically what I did and what I am assuming that I will be doing when I start is really think about the storytelling. And of course, Nike is ultimately like sportswear and shoes. But Nike, as people know, is a great brand for storytelling and storytelling through sports, and that's really where my passion is. Um, so I actually don't exactly know what team I'm going to land on. I would love to land on like the Jordan women's team at some point. I think they're doing really cool stuff in terms of how they're marketing to women
Mhm.
and basketball fans and things like that. But yeah, what I guess ultimately what I'll be doing is working on marketing strategy within sports. But I don't have an exact answer for you yet.
That's like a perfect field, it seems like for you, though. No.
No, yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited that I'll get to rotate as well and kind of get the full gamut of what Nike marketing is. And then at the end of the program, I'll kind of decide, okay, what did I like best and what's the best fit for me.
Nice.
But I do think it really aligns with what I'm trying to do on TikTok in terms of storytelling, and just like learning from some of the best marketers there are.
And you said at the end of the July, so you have a couple weeks here. I don't know what you're doing in between that time, but a couple weeks where you can really lock in on TikTok and continue to grow that. That's what as a TikTok
Hmm.
creator myself, that's what I'm thinking of. When I have a couple weeks off, it's like, oh, it's time to lock in on and get some. Do you have any? Have you had any times where you've been burnt out at all? Because I was thinking recently, I went through a stretch where I was like, videos aren't doing great. Like, is this something I want to keep doing? Am I having fun? I took like a week off and then, it helped. But is that something that you've had to deal with yet?
Yeah. So, luckily, I would say no, but I think I'm also fortunate that I have this other full-time job.
Yeah,
So I'm not, relying on TikTok and content creation as like a source of income. And so
sure.
because of that, I'm not saying like I need to post 3 times a day, every day for a week.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like when I feel inspired by a story or something, then I'll post. And that's kind of helped me manage the burnout. But yeah, the algorithm always changes. Like I was stuck at 200 views for a while, and then one
Yes,
will
yes.
again another like 10-second one where I'm just like dancing with a green screen in the background got like 270,000 views, and I'm like, okay. um, but yeah, because it's more of like a passion project for me, it's helped me to um not get burnt out.
Good, good. To finish up here, let's kind of look into the future a little bit. You said you still don't even really know fully what you want to do with this or what direction you want to go.
Hmm.
But if you had to guess, so what would be next for Audrey DeVaughn coming up here?
Yeah, so I would love to keep creating content and I will keep doing that part-time. I think ultimately I would love to get into sports media. I'm not sure what that looks like exactly. There's a few mentors that I have that are working for some companies like Highlight Her. Ari Chambers was the founder of that, and I think it was purchased by a big sports media company. And then a company called Together,
Yeah.
which was founded by Alex Morgan, Sue Bird,
Nice, nice.
and two others. Like they're really focusing on the storytelling of women's sports, and so ultimately, I think that's where I would want to be. But I'm still kind of growing from that and trying to figure out um, kind of how to carve that path. I do have an exciting collaboration coming up with a company called Parity, which is a company that's actually trying to connect brands with female athletes specifically. And so I'm going to help them
Nice.
do a little bit of work as well. And so my goal is to keep building my personal brand, keep working with brands that kind of align to my mission, and hopefully get to a place where I'm like a known personality where people respect my opinions. And then,
Sure.
I'll be on shows like yours and others where I can just kind
Yeah.
of talk and
Yeah.
and tell my story and tell the stories of other athletes. So that's the goal.
You're right on your way. And what I love about your content is the inclusivity part of it. It's something I'm very passionate about. We don't cover it with our podcast as much, but in my personal life, it's something I really try my best to inform others about. My fiance played women's basketball, so I have that kind of insight from that side.
Hmm.
The other thing I love about your content is the positivity and joy. Like through this interview, you've been smiling this entire time. I think that's great. Not
Hmm.
even behind just a camera. It seems like you genuinely are that person in your everyday life, which I think is phenomenal. We need more love and joy in this world for sure.
Hmm.
And I'm
Sure.
very happy that you were able to join us, kind of share the insights of your life and the goals that you're going towards. And obviously, best of luck. We're going to definitely be in touch with you moving forward here. But best of luck, Audrey, moving forward.
Thank you, and thanks so much. I do want to say how important it is for people like yourself to have me on your podcast. Again, a lot of my audience is very, female, and
Sure.
sometimes it feels like I'm preaching to the choir. And so it's great to have allies like yourself who care about this and care about like a women's perspective in sports, and to have me on to talk. And so thank you to you as well. I really had a lot of fun talking to you.